Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar this morning. We're here going to be talking about Aucerna Execute and the new things to come as we're launching our new brand, which was formerly AFE Nav. As a simple housekeeping moment right now, I'd like to take the time to say, please ensure your mics are muted and that you remain muted, but we're happy to have you use the chat function and ask questions in the chat below. And you can send them to myself, Amdrame, the host, or you can send it to Jeff, who is the presenter today. So as I said, my name is Amdrame, and we have Jeff here, who is our product manager with Aucerna Execute. Jeff has been in the industry for well over a decade, working specifically on execution software, and he's been with Aucerna with us for about 15 years now. And he is the, as I like to say, the brains behind Aucerna Execute, and the module we'll be going more in depth today on, which is operational scheduling, and I'll let Jeff cover that off. Myself, Amdrame, your host, I am a senior product marketing specialist here with Aucerna, and I'm happy to just be moderating. So if you do want to send me a message, you won't find my name in the list. It will come up under business development, so you can select that name if you'd like to send me a personal question that I can then ask Jeff. We will address questions at the end of the webinar so that we can save time and room for all the amazing questions we're going to have coming in. So for your agenda today, we're going to be doing an overview of Aucerna, followed by an overview of Aucerna Execute. We'll go into the asset workflow, do a demo of operational scheduling. We'll talk about what's new in 2019, perhaps what's next on the horizon, and of course, as I mentioned, the Q&A, and we'll do closing remarks. So Aucerna has been in the industry for a number of years. If you combine all of our people, which make us a part of what we do, we have 1,000+ years of relevant industry experience. We have 500+ customers worldwide. And as a company, we manage $500+ billion in capital investment, which is annually planned with Aucerna. So that sort of speaks to our market leadership as the most trusted partner in the industry. We do this by offering integrated software solutions for reserves planning and execution, bringing everything in the upstream oil and gas world together using data. And you can see that we have a broad depth of companies that we work with and a great span across the globe of companies that we do work with and help with them achieving their digital transformation needs. Today, though, we're going to be talking about our execution solutions. So for those who are not familiar with our existing execution solutions, that includes budgeting and forecasting, AFE Management, readiness workflows, and operational scheduling. Jeff here is going to be talking, as I said, most in depth about the overall solution, but specifically operational scheduling, and that's the demo we're going to go in, and that's the exciting part of what we're launching today. And so the industry today is moving to agility planning and embedded in assets, and that was kind of the world in 2014 moving into 2018. The industry today, as I said, requiring that transformation is moving to a more digital world, something that's more connected, where not just by data being connected, but people are connected, and we're motivating those conversations to happen. Included in that are the capabilities focused on financial expertise, again, in 2014, moving to a mix of technical, operational, and financial skill sets, which again is connecting the finance and operations together with the doing part of the work. Removing the siloed approach to planning and integrating everyone across planning, execution, and reserves to help companies move towards that digital framework where, again, we're not just connecting data, but we're connecting people all together and connecting teams and eliminating those roadblocks that may be created by silos. So here's where I'll hand it off to our presenter today, Jeff. Take it away.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Ahmed. So we're going to be talking about Aucerna Execute 2019. That's the latest version of the AFE Nav platform. But I thought before I jump too much into that, I'd just talk a little bit about the path and how we got there. So the sort of founding product of the product that is now Aucerna Execute was AFE Navigator. And for those of you who've been along for the journey so far, it obviously started as an AFE tool. And then back when we released AFE Nav 8.0, probably 6 or 7 years ago now, we moved to being a web-based front end instead of sort of a traditional desktop application. And around that time, we made some steps, or took some steps to, for lack of a real word, generify the back end and handle other workflows that kind of looked a little bit like AFE type things, where there's data collection and approval and that kind of thing. What we wanted to build is a platform where we could build other workflows that help solve other business problems that our clients encountered. So we released AFE Navigator 8.1, which introduced our first of these different workflows, and that was our Ready to Drill, or RTD workflow. That was very much around permitting, but it was a collaborative workflow around sort of collecting information required to sort of fill out these drill permits. Just last year, we released the next new module. This is in AFE Navigator 2018, and we called this our Budgeting and Forecasting module. And this was all about sort of a project-level view, capturing the budget for all of the projects in your capital projects, and then maintaining forecasts on those projects. And so this year, we're releasing the 2019 version. That has two new modules. There's a scheduling, or the operational scheduling module, which we'll talk about in depth, and also a shift from the Ready to Drill that was sort of targeted at pre-drill activities to what we call our RTX module, which is a generic readiness workflow. So it covers off drilling. It also covers off abandonments or workovers or whatever the different activities that you're scheduling are that you need to track some sort of readiness workflows around. And because the tool has moved away from just being AFE-centric to having different tools within this execution space, we are rebranding with this release to Aucerna Execute to kind of cover our broader scope. So we talk about execute, or why the term execute. For us, if we look at the execution space, execution is really about turning those plans that you build into reality while minimizing the destruction of value. So if we look at kind of a traditional project management diagram, where we show the sort of the value of planning, often we talk about this first part of the diagram, the part that's in blue, where we use tools such as some of our planning tools that we offer, like EnerSite or PetroVR, to make good decisions up front and to evaluate different opportunities, and that really drives business value, making sure you've got the right mix of projects and you're choosing the right ones. The execution space sort of plays in this tail end here, that once we've made all of those decisions, we've built up our business plan, we've decided what we're going to do, all of those projects have an expected value. We want to stick as close as possible to that expected value. If there are inefficiencies or mix-ups, each of those has the opportunity to erode from that project expected value. And so we're building up a suite of tools to help execute more efficiently on tools and maintain that plan value. So in this space today, I don't think it's any big surprise, but there's a lot of different tools, often disconnected. You'll have things like project plans that are stored in maybe Microsoft Project, often in Excel, maybe in Oracle P6, depending on the organization. You have things like your ERP systems, your Cubites, your SAPs, your Bolos, et cetera, that are capturing sort of the capital and the actual side. You've got regulatory and permitting work that often is handled in Excel. You have various management dashboards and stuff, maybe TIBCO or Power BI. And what we see is typically these things are not tightly integrated. They're separate tools. You end up with kind of fragile processes between them. It's difficult to track changes across these systems. It's difficult to make sure data is in sync, and it's difficult to scale. And I think it goes without saying that there's some risk to all of this, right? If we have systems built up in this place, in this way, there's a reasonable opportunity for mistakes to creep in, and everybody has their horror stories of things that have gone wrong, where we've, had unacceptable downtime on a rig because we showed up on site and it wasn't turned out we didn't have a permit yet, or just other delays that happen around there. We've missed production targets. We've paid out penalties because we didn't approve AFEs on time, or drilled somebody else's well for them by accident. All of those kinds of things happen because we don't have a tightly integrated set of tools at this level on the execution side for tracking all of this across the different people who work in this space. And then if we broaden that a little bit, we see the same sort of disconnect between the longer range planning side and the operational planning side. So for example, your long range plan might be built with a certain set of assumptions. Maybe in this case, it's a 3-rig scenario. Meanwhile, on the operations side, we're executing under a different set of assumptions, and perhaps the economics don't make sense with that disconnect. So what we'd like to do is pull those two worlds together a little bit closer, and we'll speak to that here. But using a tool, something like our Enersight tool that does field development planning, putting in all of the inputs into that tool to build out a longer range plan, using that then to seed our budget and our operational scheduling on the execution side, executing on that plan, tracking our state as we go throughout the year, and then as we get to the various points in the year and we'd like to see how we're doing to compare to our plan, having the integration that makes it seamless to flow that information back into the planning tools so that we can recheck the assumptions, rerun those economics, and make sure that things still make sense. And so that's kind of how we'd like to, across the different products that we have in our suite, we're pulling them together to allow for this kind of integration. So we have, as Ahmed pointed out earlier, we have a number of different software tools across these different aspects. We have corporate planning tools that help with, after-tax economics, the business planning side, strategy and portfolio analysis. We have asset planning tools where you're putting in your, for a field, your flow networks, your constraints, all of that kind of stuff, and building out development plans. We have reserves and production forecasting tools. And there's integrations between all of these different pieces. Today we're going to be talking strictly around the execution side. So this is going to be this box down at the bottom, Aucerna Execute, which incorporates workflows for AFE management, budgeting and forecasting, RTX or readiness, and operational scheduling. So this is one piece of software that includes 4 different modules that implement those capabilities. So we're going to go through a bit of a high-level overview of what the problem each of these modules are trying to solve is, and then we're going to jump into how those play together. So the newest module is the operational scheduling module. If we were to pick sort of the one problem, sort of high-level problem that we're trying to solve, it's bringing the team together into alignment on the overall schedule. So a really common thing that we see is when we're down at the execution side, there's obviously lots of different groups involved. You'll have drillings, completions, construction, land, facilities. Everybody has a role to play in developing these wells. Often their schedules are maintained in different tools, often different Excel sheets. Maybe one group's using Project and others using Excel. And so there's the part of the daily or weekly operations meeting is pulling those different groups together, talking about changes to the individual schedules, and then trying to make updates to the other schedules that depend on that information. And it's very manual and time consuming, and it's difficult to ensure that the overall schedule still makes sense. So what we want to do is bring all of that together into one tool where we have all of the different activities that are being planned together with the relationships between them and all of our constraints, and make it easy for the knock-on effects of changes to be seen by the team. So we still see this, the schedule in the ways that we'd like to see it, depending on our role. Drill schedule will show drilling rigs and drilling activities. But when we're moving things around now, we can see what effect that has on the other groups. And ideally, we can make these changes live in an operations meeting, and everyone can then leave the meeting without having to go back to their desks and go and manually take handwritten notes on an Excel sheet and transpose them back into Excel. And then, of course, once we have the schedule, we want to integrate that with other processes. So we've spoken a little bit about integrating it with the planning tools to take our longer range plan and use that as a starting point for the operational schedule. We'll jump into that more in more detail in a bit. But this is also about visualizing the readiness to do those activities, so tying into the readiness workflows so that as we're making changes to the schedule, we can see whether or not we're likely to be able to do those activities when we planned, if there's any red flags, that kind of thing. So that's at a high level what we're looking to address with the operational scheduling module. It's to give you control over that, or visibility into that near-term schedule, and to bring alignment across the different teams that work with that schedule. The RTX, or the readiness module, this is about systematically assembling and managing all of the information, the approvals, the documentation necessary to start work. So whereas the schedule is typically maintained by a smaller group of individuals, often the work required to track are we ready to do this? Do we have a permit? Have we surveyed? Are there any safety concerns, et cetera? All of that work involves a much larger team. This workflow is all about going out to that team, pinging the right people to collect information and status, driving that workflow forward, and then integrating it with the schedule so that we can see at a glance whether we're ready to do these activities, whether we're falling behind, and all of that kind of stuff. Just like everything else in Aucerna Execute, this workflow it benefits from a lot of the same capabilities we have around the AFE side. So lots of configuration over the workflow, over the data we collect. There's reporting and dashboards, customizable emails, all of that kind of stuff, as well as a strict permissions model and audit history to keep tabs on how data is changing. Introduced last year was our budgeting and forecasting module. This one is all about maintaining that list of in-year capital projects, building a budget from that, and then tracking progress to that budget. What we'd like to see is for all of the capital projects that are part of this year, not only are we building up a budget from that, but we'd like to make that a living evergreen forecast as well, so that instead of what typically happens where a budget gets built up, probably in Excel, stuck on a shelf and then not referred to until towards the end of the year, we'd like to make it easy for these different capital projects to incorporate actuals as we get them against those AFEs that are related to these, to bring those in, reforecast those projects so that everyone has visibility into the current spending requirements and the spending plan. If projects are overrunning, that finance has immediate visibility into that instead of trying to play catch up at the end of the year and see what went wrong. So this is all about building up this capital projects, allowing you to now raise AFEs within the context of the budget, which is something that hasn't always happened before. Potentially this gives some savings as well around the AFE approvals. If we know that our AFEs are raised for already budgeted projects, maybe we can shorten the approval process a little bit there. And then, like I said, as these AFEs start to accumulate spending, we can then start to replace historical forecast on those projects with the actuals and generate new blended forecasts. And then the final module is our AFE workflow module, and this is all about capital tracking and supporting your compliance efforts, right? Super configurable again around the type of data that we collect, how the workflow works as far as who's entering data and who needs to approve it. But there are strict workflow rules, so the idea is to make sure that the essential capital approvals are there to support your capital controls process. So many of our clients will see a pretty huge savings in terms of overall AFE approval time, moving from largely manual or Excel-based processes, or the infamous folder that moves around between desks, and moving towards an electronic process where the system will kind of manage those AFEs and move them forward, and everyone has visibility into that state. So you don't end up in those situations where AFEs get lost on somebody's desk, or where you've got excessive approvals, nobody's really sure who needs to approve it, and so you either have too many approvals or the wrong approvals. So we can take those rules, build them into the system, and make sure that based on the parameters of the AFE, the AFE type, the area, the dollar amount, that the right people approve those AFEs. And so those are kind of the four modules that we have within Aucerna Execute today. And so now I'd like to dive into a little bit of how this plays and how the workflow between these four different pieces. So this is going to be a sample workflow involving Enersight as our sort of longer range planning tool. There are sort of variants on this, just like everything else in Aucerna Execute. There's a lot of configurability. So if you're a Value Navigator client and you use Value Navigator for some of these planning activities today, there is a variant on this workflow that will work in that configuration as well. But today I'm going to focus on how this would look if we were using Enersight for field development planning. So within Enersight, you're loading in your list of all of your base production, as well as all of your potential wells you might drill. You're building in your surface network, your flow network, all of your constraints around that, production constraints, capital constraints, et cetera. Enersight is going to take all of those opportunities, all of those wells that you would like to drill, and all of the constraints that you have, and build out different activity schedules. And Enersight has the opportunity or the option to build different scenarios. What if we developed this field with 2 rigs? What if we did 4 rigs? And start to compare those different scenarios. And so EnerSite, what we're doing here is kind of looking at all of the optionality that we have and coming up with what is the go-forward approach for developing this asset or this field. Once we have that, we can then take the capital component of that and pull that across into the Aucerna Execute budgeting and forecasting module. And so we'll get a list of projects here, the things that we're planning on doing in this upcoming year. Here's what their capital spend looks like across the months, and that becomes the starting point for our capital budget. And we may tweak it a little bit within this tool, and then we can lock it in, and that is now what we're shooting for. Similarly, all of those different activities that we're getting scheduled in EnerSite, those all come across with some detailed list of activities and timing and resource allocations. So we can leverage that, pull that right across, and use that as the starting point for the operational schedule. All of those drill steps from EnerSite. And of course, again, here we can start to make changes into the operational schedule to reflect the realities of the field. As we get closer to executing on some of these activities, we then can spin up or create these RTX readiness workflows that for each of those different activities track our readiness to do those. And this is, again, a collaborative cross-discipline workflow where we're involving groups like land and engineering and HSE and geology to kind of collect all of those details and do all of that pre-work that we need to do. And then just the readiness states from there, certain milestones that we care about, can feed back into that operational schedule so we can see at a glance whether we're on track. Ideally, this gets rid of a little bit of the repeated information that happens in those weekly status meetings. Instead of having to spend time kind of rehashing the same, yep, we're done this step, done this step, done this step, we can sort of leave those to the reporting mechanism and just focus on the exceptions. And then, of course, the other half of this, once we've got the budget locked in, we can start to raise AFEs within the context of the budget. AFEs do what AFEs do. You collect a bunch of information, the estimates, et cetera. You have your approvals and your notifications that we do today. AFEs obviously flow into the accounting system, and from the accounting system, we pull in our AFE actuals. What happens then, though, is that now that we've got these AFE actuals coming against these AFEs, and those AFEs are tied to our budget, we can start to replace those historical months of forecast with the actual spend. And then the system will automatically generate a new blended forecast, which is then sort of put in front of those project owners to review and potentially reforecast if they need to. And this happens month after month as we move forward. And so the idea is that we have this, on the capital side, this evergreen view of what our capital forecast is like. And we have this living operational schedule that shows us here are all those planned activity dates. And as we're making changes in that operational schedule, those activity dates shift when that capital spend is going to happen so that we have a view on that as well. And then finally, all of this updated timing and capital can feed back into the planning tool EnerSite so that we can update the near-term component of that, update those assumptions, rerun the model, and make sure that the economics still hold. So that's kind of an overview of the 4 modules within Aucerna Execute and one possible workflow on how those interact with a client who's using EnerSite today for their planning activities. So now what I'd like to do is just jump into a little bit of a show and tell on the operational scheduling module and show what that ends up looking like. So for those who haven't seen Aucerna Execute before, Aucerna Execute is a web-based application that is composed of these 4 different modules now. For AFEs, projects, there are readiness workflows and the schedules. I'm logged in here on the dashboard, so I'm seeing information about all of these different things that are in my system today. I'm going to jump over to the Schedules tab, and we're going to focus in that area. So when I move over to there, what we'll see is I have multiple things that are multiple schedules within the system. The reason you might have multiple schedules, obviously, is if you work in different areas, you've got different business units that are largely independent, you can break those schedules into multiple separate schedules so that you're not having to kind of all work on the same set of data, and you can keep it to a more manageable size. And we'll also see shortly that we can also create copies of schedules or sandboxes to sort of spec out what would it look like if we dropped a tool and we have to move out of this rig out of this well, and we have to move the rig somewhere else. We could do option A or option B. What do those 2 scenarios look like? Let's bring it to management, decide what we're doing, and then move with that as the go-forward plan. So we have the ability to kind of create copies of schedules as well. I'll show what that looks like in just a moment. Schedules themselves are going to look something like this. So their default view is what we call our schedule Gantt view, where we're showing graphically here is a set of activities and the timing for those activities. Behind the scenes, there is a very large list of all of the different activities that we are scheduling. So this is the drills, the completes, the tie-ins, the production online, the pad construction. All of those different activities are captured here, along with their start dates, durations, resources that are assigned to them, what pad they're part of, rules about how the scheduling works, if two activities have to happen at the same time, or if one has to follow another, capital requirements for those activities. All of that kind of stuff can be captured, as well as any other custom fields you choose to track per activity. So behind the scenes, this data is there. If you're integrating with EnerSite, loading this in is just a matter of clicking the More and then Import from EnerSite button, and all of this just comes in by default. So jumping back to the schedule, what this is a view on that underlying data. We don't expect most people to be spending time interacting with the raw list of activities. That's a lot of data. It's a lot easier to look at it graphically. And so we have the concept of schedule views, and I've got a few of them here. These are configuration that presents those underlying activities in ways that work for the different groups who consume the schedule. So this is a pretty typical drill schedule where we see my drilling rigs. These red shaded out periods are for those rigs, their periods of availability. Maybe I've got leases on them and a little maintenance window on the one over here. Then we see our list of activities. Here I've got a bunch of top hole drills and then the lateral drills for a handful of pads. So this view is configured to show the name of the well. It's showing the individual activities by pad. It's coloring them by pad, etc. But this is just one view. This is just configuration. So an example would be I could choose to group these together and get a little bit of a higher level view. Let's just show the activities by pad. And here I can see, for those same rigs, where I am, in a more high level. If I'm trying to zoom out and get a big picture view of my drilling activity, I can see that with all of that without all the individual well noise. Similarly, if we were on the completion side, we can choose to see maybe just the completion events showing my frac crew and then all of the zipper fracs that I have for those groups. Or maybe pad construction. I want to see my construction crew and then which pads are being built out by those different crews. So again, I just want to reiterate that this is just configuration. So the concept is that we have one list of all of these different activities and all of the relationships between that activities. And then we work with you to configure out different views that let those different groups see the information they want. So when I jump back to my drill schedule, this configuration is choosing, what rows are we showing? Are we showing resources? What kind of resources? We're choosing which types of activities do I want to see on the schedule? Is it, just top hole lateral? Do I want to see all activities or just frac activities? How to roll up adjacent cells, if that makes sense. What text to show on the box. So I've got the name of the well and just the type of activity showing on here right now. But any information that we capture on the activity or the related readiness workflow is fair game here. So we can load this up with information so that the teams who are looking at the schedule see the information they want to see at a glance. We also, you'll notice these little colored dots. I'll get back to this in a moment, but these are what we call our readiness milestones. These are pieces of information that are pulled off of the related RTX and that are presented graphically to let us see, do we have any concerns with, given the timing of this activity, do we have some mandatory steps that are not yet done? So just to give one more example of a view, here is a view showing our projects by pad. So if I expand one of these different pads, we'll see, here's my pad construction for the whole pad, and then here are all of the individual wells with their detailed activities. So this is to give kind of a view on some of what's available here. We can have these kind of relationships as well. We do track the relationships between these activities. So when you're moving things, we can do smart things like know that these activities have to be together, this one has to follow this one, and move them in ways that make sense. So again, this is all just configuration. You're able to kind of build up different views to make sure that each of the different groups who work on the schedule and who look at it can see the information that's important to them. So I'm going to now jump into a little bit of what it's like to edit a schedule. Before I do that, though, right now what I'm working on is what we call a master schedule. So this is meant to, for this particular set of wells, this is meant to to be the source of truth. If other aspects of the company are looking at the schedule, they should probably be referring to the master schedule. Or if we built integrations against the system to leverage schedule information and push it into a corporate dashboard or something along those lines, the master schedule is typically what you'd refer to. So I'm going to make a copy of this schedule and do some of my changes in there. So you'll now see that this is marked as a schedule copy. I have my same list of activities in here, but now I'm making all of my changes in a sandbox instead of in that live master schedule. And there's lots of reasons you might want to do this. You might be doing just some experimental changes and you don't want the rest of the company to see them. Or it might be that if you've got a drilling person who's making some changes and then the completions group is going to follow up later and make some changes based on those drilling changes, there's a period of time where the schedule is going to contain some broken information where drilling has overlapped some completion activities or something like that. So you don't want the rest of the organization to see that until it's fixed up and we have a coherent schedule. So we can do those in a copy and then promote them back to master when we're ready. So within the schedule, we have a bunch of different things that we can do. Obviously, we want to be able to move activities around, make changes to the schedule, and we can do that in a graphical way. So we have some different options up there as far as tools that we can use for this. So the simple one is just to move some activities to a specific point in time. So I can grab an activity and drag it. In this case, because these are part of a pad, they're all coming together, all of these top hole drills. There's a separate rule that is saying that those come together, but I can move individual activities around using the move tool. I can also shift an entire rig line using the shift tool. So if I wanted to open up a gap between these Thor wells and the Stanley wells, I can use the shift tool and it'll push everything that follows out backwards, or I can use it to close up gaps as well. And then there's the reorder tool that lets us change the order of events on a rig line. So for example, if I wanted to drill the Thor 6 well first, I can drag that up to the front and reorder those activities. So those tools by themselves just move the activities that I'm selecting. Behind the scenes, though, there's a bunch of other activities that are tied in with these, right? There's the completion activities, the production online, there's the pad construction, et cetera. If we want to move those as well, there's some options as far as, do I want to have side effects when I'm moving drilling activities? Do I want to move everything else in that project along with, or do I want to just move the downstream activities? So to give you a bit of a view what that looks like, if we just change to the project level view, if I were to just drag around these top hole activities, we'll see that they move just on their own. They don't drag along all of the related activities. But if I choose to drag the downstream activities as well, now when I move one of these, the rest of the schedule will shift around. So there's, depending on how your teams work, there's different options for making smart changes to the schedule. Incidentally, we can also, while we're looking at views like this and we have a rolled up view, we can also drag around the whole pad and shift the whole pad forward and backwards. One thing I'd like to point out, you've seen it a few times already, I've got this peppermint striped thing going on. The system knows about a certain set of constraints, and over time we expect to add more and more constraints. By and large, we would like to make sure that users using the schedule can make the changes they want to make, and the system isn't preventing them from making changes. But we certainly want to notify them if it looks like they're doing something that violates the rules. So this would be rules like in this case, I have a single construction crew, and I've got overlapping construction tasks on the same crew. So I'm seeing it, this activity is highlighted there. I'm seeing it in this errors list on the tool. I also have an errors tab that showed up over here that's showing me that list of errors. So this is what we're talking about, where as we're making changes to the schedule, we can see if the knock-on effects are causing issues with other parts of the schedule without having to necessarily go into that ops meeting, have somebody go back to their desk, realize that this has caused a problem, and then sort of fix things and iterate back and forth that way, that we can kind of see these changes live, or these problems live. A couple other things so I'll mention here. When I'm selecting some of these things, you'll see down below we have a table-based version of this. So this pad is showing me all of the different activities related to this pad. I can see all of those different activities, and I can make edits to the individual data underneath that. So if I wanted to tweak a start date or a duration and the drag and drop is not doing it for me for those kinds of changes. I can just make them in the tabular version down below, as well as change resources, add notes, etc. If I go back to my schedule here, of course we can do other things as well. Like if I wanted to make an activity longer, I can graphically change the duration of an activity and stretch that out. In this case now I've caused an overlap on those completion events, and now I can jump over to my completion schedule, and I will see that down below that by pushing out those activities I've caused these fracs to overlap. So now I can go ahead and push these out to resolve that conflict and get rid of those errors. A few other things that we've got happening over here. If I'm making these changes to the schedule, we have a capital summary. We know the capital for each of these different activities, so we can show you what the monthly capital spread looks like for these different activities. And if we are making a set of edits, we can show kind of the before and after. By shifting this out, I've caused a whole pile of capital to move from September to October, say. So we can get at a high level that capital overview as we're making live edits to the schedule. So let's talk a little bit about the milestone side. So as I said, the view configuration, we're deciding, what the rows are, whether they're rigs, whether they're frac crews, whether they're projects, etc. We're choosing what text that we see on these different activity boxes, how they're colored. Are we coloring by pad? Are we coloring for certain statuses? Are we coloring by, value? Do we want all of our valuable wells to be a certain color so that we can sort of easily visually move those to the front of the line? All of those things are stuff that's easy to do through configuration. And then we also have these milestones. So these are for this view, for drilling is looking at a drilling schedule, we're picking out certain key things that we would like to highlight on the schedule and just give some stoplight type indicators whether we're ready to do those activities at that planned time or not. So the green ones, those are obviously, these milestones are completed, but these red ones, these ones are at risk. And the idea with milestones is that these are time sensitive. So if I were to just take these activities and drag them way out into the future, you'll notice all of those things that were red have gone to blue because while they're still not done, they're no longer at risk with the current schedule. And as I move these activities forward, you'll see them moving from blue to yellow and then eventually to red. So that's, again, meant to give kind of a quick visual indication of where we're at. Let's go take a look at this Thor well here. So this one has an associated RTX that is guiding the workflow. I'm not really spending too much time focusing on the RTX workflow, but for me, on my RTX here associated with that well, I want to be able to mark it off as having a permitted permit. So the RTX workflow is, for those who are familiar with the AFE side, this is a big collaborative workflow where you're inviting a team of people in to start collecting information about the status of this well, all of those pre-work steps, and there's approvals and data validation and all of that kind of stuff. Just to keep the demo simple, I've kind of created some quick fields, and the one that I'm highlighting right now is just this permit flag. So here is my big workflow document for this Thor 1 well. Now that I've changed the permit to yes, if we jump back and take a look at our schedule, we'll see that Thor 1 now has green lights across the board. So as the workflows are being carried out in parallel with the schedule edits, we see those updates to those statuses live on our schedule here. So just like everything, we'll jump into that in a moment. So once I've made a bunch of changes, in this case, I've made a bunch of changes I probably don't actually want, but pretend I do. So I've made some changes to my schedule. That was my schedule copy. If you notice, if I go back to my master schedule here, I have all of those changes that I've made, none of those have come across at this point. The master schedule and the copy that I've been working on are completely independent schedules. But if I decide now that I would like to promote those changes that I made in the copy to being the current plan and share those with the rest of the organization, I can choose to merge a schedule into this one. And when I do that, it asks me for another schedule that's in that same sort of grouping of schedules. And then it'll give me this quick visual indication of kind of what is going to happen out of this. So in this case, I've got a bunch of top-level activities that moved forward in time. They're green. They've moved forward about 2 days. And then a whole bunch of the rest of the schedule that I pushed out is being moved backwards in time. We can see that there's some duration changes, that activities got pushed out. And so this is meant to give you kind of that quick, heads up, here's what's going to happen when you merge the schedule into another. We can skim through that, and if we're happy with it, we can then choose to merge that in, and now my master schedule has been updated with that new information. Just like you'd expect with everything else in Aucerna Execute, we have a complete change tracking on this, so we can see that we merged the schedule at this point and who did it and when. We can always go back to a previous point in time and take a look at what the schedule was before we merged things in. And new in this version of the software, there's now a rollback button as well that applies here, but also to other records that we manage in Aucerna Execute. So if I have mistakenly merged the wrong schedule over top of my working schedule, or if we've done a synchronization of actuals or new plan information from the wrong source, or we bulk imported from Excel, like if we've done something and we just really kind of messed up the schedule, it's now super easy to get back to where you were. If you, in this case, I don't like the merge and I want to go back to where I was, I can choose to, roll back, throw in a comment, and now I'll be right back where I was before I had merged those changes in. So it makes it safe to kind of do those operations. There's always a path to undo that. We have a series of notifications that also follow around the schedule. So obviously, the workflow for a lot of companies today is more of a push approach where a set of individuals will manage the drill schedule and the completion schedule and the facility schedule. Obviously, the broader organization cares a great deal about many of those different activities and the dates. And so what happens today is often those Excel sheets are PDF'd and then they're sent around by email, or maybe they're printed off on a plotter and stuck on a wall, or any of that kind of stuff. What we'd like to do is bring people into the system. And so we've got some tools around sending email notifications. So for example, if I wanted to know about changes to the schedule, I could just put a watch on the schedule. And then when those changes are merged in from those copies, I'll get an email summary of what those changes are, and then I can click the link and jump right into that schedule to look at the details. Or if I'm the owner of specific activities, I can choose to be notified when somebody changes my activities and see an email update for those as well. We do, of course, have a print function that will take the current schedule you're looking at and generate an image that you can use to embed in a PowerPoint or potentially print. Although we think the better workflow is, rather than printing off giant plotter-sized things and sticking those into the room like a boardroom, is to start investigating options such as putting a TV up on the wall and actually putting the live schedule on that TV where everyone can see the live information. You end up being fortunate if it's something like a touch TV, you can then start to touch on these individual activities and sort of zoom in to see the details and look at the related RTX steps and all of that kind of stuff from that view, instead of having a static paper copy that quickly gets out of date. So that's where we're aiming on that. Obviously, so we've talked a little bit about the integration with RTX as far as these milestones. There's also, of course, the ability, as we're moving things around in the schedule, to push those changes of dates to other parts of the software. So if you're tracking SPUD dates on your RTX, to push those dates across to the RTX so that you can then trigger workflow events based on the timing of the planned timing for that event. Similarly, if you need to push some of this information across to the AFE side so you can track start and end dates on your AFEs, that's easy enough to do. And like I said, when the budgeting and forecasting side, as we're moving these activities around, this is causing shifts in the capital on our budgeting and forecasting piece as well. So all of these different modules tie together. If we're working with EnerSite, we can then take these changes and push our updates back into EnerSite to lock in that near-term component, rerun the EnerSite model based on those new assumptions, get the new economic results out of that, and then as well import sort of future activities from EnerSite into this tool to make changes. So as a high level, that's kind of how the different pieces work in the operational schedule. Again, this is all about pulling all of those activities together, trying to eliminate Excel or disconnected tools as the scheduling tool that the organizations are using, pull them together into one place where everyone can see the information they'd like, where we can then integrate that with those readiness workflows so that we're not having to track those in emails or SharePoint or shared Excel sheets, and that everyone gets more visibility into what's going on with the schedule, and we get rid of sort of the manual error, data validation checks, manual consistency checks across these schedules. I guess I forgot to mention, but hopefully it goes without saying that just like everything else in Aucerna Execute, when we're seeing these tables of information, we've talked a lot about graphically editing this information, but all of this underlying information here, you can export this to Excel, you can import and update from Excel. We've got data loaders for all of this stuff. So if you're using different tools, if your workflows involve making changes outside of kind of the graphical one, and you'd like to be able to make those changes kind of en masse, you can do those in the same way you can with the other data that we track within Aucerna Execute. So that kind of wraps up for kind of an overview of the scheduling module. So that's obviously the sort of big new feature in Aucerna Execute 2019, but I'd like to kind of talk about what else we have in Aucerna Execute 2019 here. So we talked about the RTX module. How this works, in 8.1 we released the RTD, or Ready to Drill module. And again, that was kind of around tracking pre-work for permitting. And because of that, it shipped with a whole pile of fields out of the box related to that particular workflow. And as we started working with clients on this, it became clear that clients were looking for more than just ready to drill. We wanted to be able to track abandonments and workovers in much the same way. And it also turned out that everyone had very different requirements on the data that we captured. And so the end result was that there was a lot of fields that would kind of get turned off and would get ignored from the RTD. And so what we decided to do was to create a new module called RTX that is very much similar to the RTD, but is aimed at handling multiple readiness workflows. It has some enhancements on top of what RTD offers, and it has a lot fewer out-of-the-box fields. So this makes a cleaner starting point when you're trying to roll out, drilling, abandonment, workover, et cetera, readiness workflows. RTD, the module, will continue to work as is in 2019. We didn't want to drastically change RTD and risk breaking existing deployments. So instead, RTD will work as it does before. RTX is the new module. New implementations will be done using the RTX module, and clients who are wishing to take advantage of the newer capabilities of the RTX module can move across to RTD when they're ready to do so. There will be tools to help make that migration nice and straightforward, but we didn't want to be renaming tables and risking breaking integrations or anything like that. So that's kind of where we're at on that. So the RTX module includes some nice new features around things like resetting, for those of you who've used the RTD side, resetting approvals when certain key data elements change. That's an easy out-of-the-box feature now. It's just a checkbox. So if the surface location changes, you can automatically remove the approvals by, say, geology and engineering and cause them to sort of reevaluate because of those changes. And then some of the other changes I'll talk about in just a moment. Because we've got some of these new modules, we implemented what we're calling our implementation wizard. And this is all about just making it a little bit easier to get up and running with these new tools. So generally, we still expect most clients are going to work with an implementations person on our side to help roll out and adopt these new modules and guide the business process side. This is just another resource that kind of lays out all of those steps required for adopting a new module, what needs to be configured, some of the things to think about, where links to documentation exist, and all of that kind of stuff. So if you're rolling out a new module, you'll see this just appear in your dashboard, and it'll lay out all those steps for you, and then it'll track your progress through those as you go. Today, those exist for the RTX module and the operational scheduling module, but the intent is the rest of the modules will grow these as well so that it becomes just easier to roll out new instances. Because we've got these new modules, we wanted to make some changes to the licensing side to make it give a little bit more control over which types of licenses the user can use. So by default, new users are able to take licenses from any of the different modules, but it's now possible to restrict it. So if you have users who only ever work in the AFE module and you don't want them inadvertently taking an RTX license or an operational scheduling license or a budgeting and forecasting license, you can now restrict those licenses that way. You can also set up a preferred module. So if you've got users who almost always are logging into the AFE module, you can just make sure that that's the license they take by default instead of having them jump into one of the other modules by default that maybe you've got more restrictive licensing around. We've made some changes around multi-user editing within Aucerna Execute. So this applies to all of the different modules that we have. For those of you who've used the tool before, I'm sure you've all run into the issue where you go to make some changes to an AFE, or you go to approve an AFE, and somebody else is already in there, and it won't let you, put it into edit mode, or won't let you approve, and you kind of don't know that until you press the button. So what we've done is now made it live, where if you open an AFE or a schedule or an RTX, and somebody else has that thing currently locked to being edited, you will see that, immediately on the screen. The moment they release that lock, you will see that as well as it'll reload the data on your screen. So you're never looking at stale information, and you're never sort of surprised that somebody else has a lock on the thing that you're working on. This one has been asked for, I think, since AFE Nav 8.0 was released, is the ability to put some rules around the custom tabs. So we obviously have the ability to create custom tabs, and you can put fields on the custom tabs. And there's a lot of configurability around that. But what we didn't have was the ability to just say, you know what, I only want my drilling tab to show up on drilling AFEs or drilling readiness workflows. Or, this particular version of the drilling tab only works, this is the Canada drilling one versus the US drilling tab, that kind of thing. We weren't able to do that before, and now we can. So on the custom tabs now, there is a rule done using the same puzzle piece type rule building engine that we use for everything else. And so now we can start to put rules on there so that as we're changing attributes of our AFEs or readiness workflows, the list of tabs down the side can change to show the appropriate list of tabs. This might be the most boring slide ever, but we've added the ability to stick a note with your when you're saving a change to a document. So what happens is, if you click the Done button, that just saves as it did before. But for cases where it makes sense now, there's a little note icon that goes next to Done. That saves those changes, but puts a note into the change history with it. So that when you're looking at the change tracking tab, you can put in a little piece of text that is then searchable and gives some explanation of why a set of changes was made. So this shows up if you're an administrator making administrative edits to AFEs, RTXs, or projects. And it also shows up for changes to all of the business rules and other stuff that we track in Aucerna Execute. So if you're managing approval rules and you're making some changes and would like to leave a note for future you or for an auditor explaining why those changes are being made, this gives a tool to do that and to log those into the change history so that's all visible in one place. I've already mentioned this, but obviously Aucerna Execute stores history on changes to all of the records that we track, AFEs, RTX, projects, schedules, all of the business rules like approval rules, validation rules. And you can always go back and see a point-in-time snapshot for any of those different versions. Now you can do two other things as well. So we can roll a document back to any point in its history. This is useful if you've accidentally made some changes to a document that were in error. You can undo those. And you can also make a copy of a document at a certain point in time. So if you have an older version of a schedule that you'd like to bring back to life and continue from without necessarily rolling it back, you can make a copy of that older record, bring that back, and work forward from there. Obviously, the schedule can be if you're dealing with 1 or 2 or 3 rigs like what I had, it's not a huge amount of space we take up, but for some clients dealing with lots of rigs or lots of activities or tons of detail in those activities, screen real estate can become a concern. So we've added a quick full screen mode that just lets you hide all of the stuff around Aucerna Execute, the title bar, the menus, the action bar at the top, the document header, and just get more screen real estate back. So while this is primarily aimed at the schedule, this is available on all of the other different modules as well. So if you're hard at work on the AFE module and you just like to get rid of all of that extra fluff at the top and just have more space to look at the AFE, now just pressing F10 will hide all of that other stuff and let you have more of your screen to work with. So as a quick summary, Aucerna Execute, we've got a brand new name. It's still the same core technology behind AFE Navigator, but we've renamed to Aucerna Execute to better reflect the new scope of the product around solving problems within the execution space. We've introduced 2 new modules for operational scheduling and the readiness or RTX workflows. We've made some changes on the licensing side to make it easier to have more control over the licensing of those new modules. We've implemented the implementation wizard to help rolling out those new modules and give kind of a better overview of what's involved, the different steps to take on those new capabilities. We've made some multi-user enhancement changes. We've rolled out the ability to do the custom tabs, and then some changes around the versioning history, being able to save notes, being able to roll back and copy historical items. And so that's kind of where we're at with Aucerna Execute 2019. This was released May 6th, so this is available now. If you're an Aucerna Execute or an AFE Nav client already and you're using 2017 or 2018, the upgrade path is nice and straightforward. It's run the installers, that kind of stuff. Depending on which modules, if you're looking to adopt new modules, that obviously requires sort of more of a project approach. But just upgrading to the latest and greatest to get take advantage of these new features on the existing workflows you have is a pretty light touch. And I guess I'll leave it off there on the existing version, and then let's talk a little bit about where we're going next. So when we look at our roadmap for Aucerna Execute, we've got a few major themes. One major one is that we'd like to simplify deployment of Aucerna Execute in the cloud. We'd like to be able to offer hosted Aucerna Execute clients for the majority, environments for the majority of our clients. If this isn't of interest to you right now or at all, even if you don't really want to move from your Aucerna Execute on-prem to Aucerna Execute hosted by Aucerna, the changes that we're looking to make here are ones that I think are going to improve the management of Aucerna Execute for everybody. So some of the things that we're looking at are making the deployment and management of these environments easier by changing how we do configuration. For those of you who've dabbled in the back end, there's a lot of config files that set up various aspects of the software. We'd like to pull those more into the front end of the tool and make it easier to configure those types of things. Fewer restarts of environments when you're restarting or adding new fields and that kind of stuff. And then the other one is just building up our integration tools. Obviously, if Aucerna Executes in the cloud, Aucerna Execute ties in with tons of different software accounting systems, data management systems, in-house data management systems. If we're in the cloud and these other systems are on-prem, that's going to be an issue. So we need to build up some solutions around integrating with those on-prem systems. And I think what this is going to bring with it is some overall enhancements to how we handle integrations, making it easier to tie in with the other systems you have. We know we're going to be making some changes around the operational schedule. So right now, a lot of the data validation rules that are in there, these are around things like resource utilization. You can't have 2 activities on the same rig or on the same construction crew at the same time. If a rig is not available and you try and put an activity on that period of time, it'll complain about that. But it would be nice to be able to use that custom puzzle piece stuff again to allow users or admins to build up their own rules to validate the kind of checks that you need to worry about with your particular, the way you work. So that's going to be coming for sure. And the other one that we know is on the roadmap is just being able to combine schedules. If you do break out your schedules by asset or business unit, being able to pull those together and make an overall schedule out of one single view on that is certainly important for some workflows. And so that's something that'll be coming as well. And then a few things that we're looking at that I'd love feedback from if this is something that's of interest to you. But we would like to make some enhancements around the workflow side, being able to assign specific tasks as part of the workflow. So being able to say, when we release this RTX, start this RTX process, I would like the geology person enter a geoprog and these 3 fields. Then it's going to go to engineering and they're going to fill in these 3 things. Then it's going to go back to geology, they're going to fill in something else. Then it's going to integrate with WellView, et cetera. Being able to have that kind of a flow defined so that we can give a little bit more guidance about what needs to be entered when. That is something that we're looking at very seriously. Another one would be around the well costing space. So building out those estimates for AFEs and capital projects, more of a bill of materials approach. I think today this happens in Excel sheets where each engineer has their sheet that has, for this well, I've got 50 feet of pipe. This is how much, I'm spending for that, this much mud, this much labor, this much whatever. We want to be able to offer some tooling around that where you can have a standardized cost catalog and then compose your estimates from a series of materials and use it to build up that way. And then potentially also integrate stochastics in there so you can have more of a risk-based approach to well costing. And then the other area that we're really seriously looking at is something around op costs, budgeting, and forecasting. We've already got the module around the capital side, but obviously OpEx is extremely important as well, and I think that belongs integrated within this workflow. So those are some potential areas that we're going to be working in here, sort of broad strokes that we're looking at in the near future. And with that, I'll wrap up the presentation part and open it up to questions.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you for everyone else on the call this morning for sharing your day with us. We do have a few questions that came in through the line, so Jeff, I'm going to read those out to you. And of course, if you have additional questions that you think of that you'd like to send to me via the private chat, please do so, and I will read them out. So, Jeff, your first question today is going to be, do you have API integration with ERP systems to get actuals into budgeting and operational module? And specifically, they're looking for integration with SAP or JD.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So there are a lot of different integration points within Aucerna Execute. Bringing in actuals and field estimates, like actual spending, those are two that almost everybody who uses the platform leverages. So we have integrations with lots of the smaller accounting systems, as well as around generic tools for integrating with tools like SAP and JD Edwards. So roughly the flow is that we work with you to kind of build up a view that presents the data that you're looking to load into Aucerna Execute, the actuals, AFE number, month, dollar amount, GL account, present that to Aucerna Execute, and then we configure on our side a data loader that will pull that in and load that into the tool. So we have tons of clients today who have SAP or JD Edwards and load that information in from those tools in a nightly automated fashion. Just while I'm talking about that area as well, so that is around actuals. We do have the same kind of capabilities around other master data as well. So if another super common one is the list of participants or partners. Those often exist in accounting systems. Nobody wants to have to maintain those twice. So we can bring those list of partners into Aucerna Execute in a similar automated fashion. Or if you have well header information that's stored in a tool like WellView and you'd like to make sure that the latest well name and API number or whatever are available within your AFEs or your RTX workflows, those kind of synchronizations are easy to set up as well to bring that information in and keep parts of Aucerna Execute in sync with other tools. And then if you're looking to go really crazy, we have a full set of APIs around everything that Aucerna Execute does. So if you're looking to have another system call in and generate or manipulate the schedule in any way, our APIs can be used to do that kind of thing as well.
Excellent, thank you. Another question that came in was, how easy is it to configure schedules with new user-defined fields?
Yeah, so that's easy enough. You can add, so on my schedule I have my list of activities. Here are some of the different fields that we ship with out of the box. A few of these are things that I just threw in there, such as can produce, sorry, not that one. Area is one that I've just tossed on the end of this just to have something to do some filtering on. It's just a matter of going into tools, configuration, schedule, add field, and just starting to add fields to the schedule. And you can add new columns onto the end of this. And then those columns are available for bulk loading through Excel. They're available for back-end synchronization. So if you have, from your well management system, if you have status or something like that, or daily drilling reports that you would like to be able to sort of automatedly load into the schedule and visualize within the schedule, you can easily add fields for that and then sync that data from some other tool. So this is all like the setting up these new fields. This is just front-end stuff. You just go into the management screen and just say add new field.
Excellent, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Another one that came in was, going kind of back into the demo here that you have up. So in the demo, when schedules were being merged, does the user have the ability to accept or reject individual row or cell changes? Or is it that the merge has to be, the whole merge has to be accepted or rejected?
Yeah, so right now, probably being a little overzealous with the use of the word merge. This is more of a future-facing word merge. So right now when you merge, it is pulling the entire schedule forward. So the appropriate use cases today are, I have option 1 or option 2. We've planned out those two. We're going to go with option 2. Let's make that the plan. Or we have the master schedule is kind of left alone, and we do all of our edits in a copy and then push those back into the master. The reason we use the word merge is because that is definitely on the horizon, is we'd like to do more of that kind of stuff where we are selectively applying changes, or potentially where we have, drilling works in a copy and completion works in a copy, and then we can merge in just those specific sets of changes into the master schedule so that they're a little bit more independent of each other. So today that doesn't exist. That is something that we're looking at building out, and that's kind of why we use the word merge today.
Sounds great. Thank you. Before we get on to the next few questions here, just a friendly reminder to everyone that we are still taking questions, and I can see that they're still coming in, so keep them coming. Jeff, this one's kind of an interesting question. I do actually really like it because we didn't fully go into the RTX module as a demo, but someone is wondering how easy is it to set up workflows in RTX, and how user-friendly is that?
It's always a difficult question, I guess. It's easy enough to add fields, and it's easy to add data validation rules and to add approval workflows and all of that kind of stuff. The hard part always is kind of working through the business side, figuring out what that workflow needs to be, and then converting that into rules. So like the physical steps are not complicated. Adding a new field, if you wanted to, you've got a drilling workflow already, and now you want to add abandonment. If you already have good clarity into what that looks like, for abandonment for us, here's the data we collect, here are the 3 different disciplines that are involved in that, and here's what they're responsible for filling out. The steps to do that are pretty straightforward. It's just often that isn't clear going into it. So that's why we typically have our project managers involved. They'll sit down with our clients and sort of talk through all of those different decision points, like who creates these things, what data do they enter, who else is involved in the process, what do they enter, what do the permissions need to be, who has to approve this, if anyone, what systems does it tie with. That's where it gets a little bit more exciting.
Excellent. Another RTX question came in here.
Mm-hmm.
Can you have different RTX workflows for different business units, offshore versus onshore, for example?
Yeah. So for sure. So for those who are familiar with the AFE side, it's handled similarly to the AFE side, where you can add whatever attributes you'd like to kind of categorize those RTXs. By default, we ship with one that's called RTX type, and that's meant to say, drilling, abandonment, workover. But you could also add another one that's like country, and then you can change the business rules to be dependent on both of those things. So, a drilling RTX for Canada is different than one for the Middle East, say. And so you can do that kind of within the business rules and the data validation rules. And then using the new custom tab stuff as well, you can even change the look of those. So if you're, again, Canada and Middle East option example, if the requirements, the data requirements for those 2 different jurisdictions are drastically different, or the rules on what data gets captured, you can change the look of those tabs based on those attributes as well.
Keep those questions coming. Jeff, someone's wondering, will there be a way to make retroactive changes to a saved budget or forecast and archive for capital tracking? I guess they're looking for a way to retroactively create a budget archive.
So that's an interesting one. That's come up a couple different times lately. I'm not sure. I'll describe the context that we've had this discussion in, and then looks like Owen, if you want to pipe up and make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. But the way our budgeting and forecasting module works today is we load in a whole bunch of different projects from maybe Enerside, or we're loading these in by hand. In these different projects, if I open them up just for some context here, we have a capital forecast where we're saying, here's how much I'm going to spend for development, for completion. The buckets here are configuration, obviously, and some timing. And the system will generate these monthly forecasts. And then the idea is once we have these monthly forecasts for each of these capital projects, we can lock that in, and that becomes the budget we steward towards. And so one set of discussions we've had around this is what happens if we have some sort of major changes to the budget. Like if we know we have a scope change in this well, the parameters are different, it's going to cost a lot more, or we're taking this well out and we're putting this well in, et cetera. The budgets are very much that right now. They are a point-in-time snapshot. So when I go into the tools and say I want to create a budget snapshot, it freezes all of the capital at this point in time, and that is the budget we're stewarding towards. So what we've been talking about doing is building in sort of like budget change records, where rather than sort of taking a new snapshot that we put in, we start to create records that make changes, that allocate capital from one project to another project, or that, add capital to a particular project, but in a way that it's, auditable, that maybe there's some approval mechanisms around that because we already have that kind of tooling anyways, so that we can have a controlled and auditable set of changes to the budget. So we wouldn't be taking additional budget archives, we'd instead be sort of adding additional modifications on there where you could see, here's exactly what changed, when it was changed, who approved it, that kind of thing. So we don't have a specific ETA on that, but that's what we're looking at around that area. Is that kind of what the question was?
Looks like Owen is saying, yeah, budget change record would be great. Our problem has been a workflow and timing approval problem.
Yeah, so we are sort of in the midst of talking with a number of clients around this kind of stuff. Owen, if you want to get in touch with me or with the client services group directly and just reach out, we'd love to chat more about this and make sure that we're kind of building out the right solution that's going to work for everybody on this. So it sounds like this is a similar approach. This approach would work. We just need to make sure that we kind of capture all of it there. So thank you.
So the next question that we had that came in, I'm loving these questions that are coming in. These are actually really, really good, strong questions.
Yes, it's fantastic.
So the next one that came in was, how can we make sure the rest of the company doesn't see partially updated schedules?
Depends how strict you want to be about that. The way that the workflow that I prefer around this is that your master schedule is never edited directly, and then instead we're always making changes within a copy. So we have, in this case, my sample schedule 2. That one maybe is only editable by somebody who's allowed to sort of promote changes to the rest of the company, and then the rest of the team that is involved in the schedule is working within a copy. And then we can set it up so that the copy has a different list of permissions, like different people who are allowed to edit the copy than who can edit the master, so we can kind of lock it down that way. And then we just instruct the rest of the company to look at the master schedules, not these sort of in-flight working copies. If that isn't strict enough, if you're worried about you want to physically lock it down and make sure that the rest of the organization cannot see these in-flight schedules, that's easy to do too. We have configurable view rules on all of the records that we have in Aucerna Execute. So you just build up a view rule that says, only master copies are, or I guess kind of the other way around. Master copies are visible by everyone. Schedule copies are visible only by the people who have permission to edit those copies, say. I think that's how we'd end up doing that.
We got another question that came in. It was, can we add formulas to calculate activity durations?
Not yet. So right now, within our current workflow, when we look at our schedule, each of these different activities, obviously there's a duration associated with them. We can, visually drag them around. We can change the numbers to change the amount of the duration. Today, these are not calculated here. So if you wanted to update them in bulk, you could do that through Excel for sure. We're expecting that for clients who are using Enersite already has all of this calculation type stuff around the different activity timings. So this kind of work would be done on that side, and we would just be leveraging the numbers it has. That said, though, the back-end code is there. We know this is a feature that is coming, so there's no way to configure this right now. But that is absolutely on the roadmap, is being able to provide some rules so that you can get that behavior where your rig has a certain speed, and your wells have a depth associated with them. So if you wanted to do some sort of calculation on speed versus depth or whatever to come up with an approximate duration, that you can build out those rules in here, and as you're dragging it between different resources, you see the duration change. So that isn't there now. That is something that we are certainly expecting we will add at some point, based on client feedback.
Excellent. I just sent a message out to everyone. We still have a few minutes left for questions, so keep them rolling. Jeff, someone's asking, what types of schedule validations does the system perform?
Oh, okay, sure. So right now, the schedule validations are around things like, if I were to, let's just throw it in edit mode here. So if I were to overlap some activities on a resource like this, you'll get, complaints around overlapping activities. If I were to drag some activity into a period where it's the rig or the resource is unavailable, so this is either the rig is unavailable or maybe the area is unavailable if we have environmental restrictions or STIPs, it'll warn for those kinds of things. If I, because there's relationships between this data, the lateral has to happen after top hole. If I change the order of those, we will see notifications saying that I've violated those constraints, that my lateral does not happen after top hole ends. So those are the kinds of constraints that we have right now, sort of the relationships between activities and resource usage. The back end of this is extensible, so we are fully expecting to layer on more validation sort of quickly as required. So I've spoken a little bit about leveraging the custom business rules engine to allow you to draw your own. Other things that might fall into this would be SIMOPS type stuff if you're wanting to make sure, or for frac protect if you're wanting to make sure that you're, not fracking within a certain distance of your drills. That kind of location aware stuff. That is stuff that's certainly on the horizon as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Owen sent another question. Is there a similar type of integration with ValNav as there is with Enersite?
Yeah, so the integration with ValNav is a little bit differently. Like the ValNav isn't building out the same level of detail in the schedule down to sort of the daily granularity. So the integration flows a little bit differently. From ValNav, we'd expect that to move into our list of projects with the sort of rough timing for these different activities. We're at the monthly granularity, here's the capital, and here's the monthly granularity activity timing for drill complete, production online, that kind of stuff. And then once you've done that and imported that from ValNav, and you can do that in bulk, then we have an alternative workflow that is, instead of importing a completed schedule, that we can then start to take projects that are in our inventory within Aucerna Execute and schedule them. So that is a matter of just bringing up a list and choosing as we're ready to start executing or putting these schedules on paper to be able to kind of find those projects, add them to a schedule, and then drag them around in a schedule to add that daily granularity. And then, of course, ValNav already has bulk imports for new production dates to shift production forecasts around, as well as capital imports. So we just produce the outputs in those formats, and you leverage how ValNav currently works to bring that data in and get that sort of complete loop. So we're not pulling in a completed schedule from ValNav. We're pulling in a list of projects, scheduling them within this tool, and then pushing back dates and updated capital to ValNav.
An important distinction for sure between the two. Someone's wondering, or Zinka, sorry, is wondering, can the scheduler do auto scheduling? It looks like she's looking for matching activities to resourcing and auto optimizing of the schedule.
Great question. Within Aucerna Execute Scheduler today, no, that is not we don't have an auto-scheduling component to that. If you are using a workflow that involves EnerSite, that is one of the roles that EnerSite has, is to maintain that inventory of wells, to know all of the different resource constraints and production constraints for your flow networks and all that kind of stuff, and to build out a schedule, a realizable schedule with realistic development timelines. And so when we're working in that kind of operation, I think the need for an optimizer is less, like having something that is just going to, I don't know, shuffle activities to maximize, production or minimize capital or something like that. Instead, we're leveraging all of that work that's done in the planning tool, and now the operational scheduling is largely more focused on, we've got this plan, we're trying to stick to this as close as possible. It's about tracking the day-to-day work, making sure that we're ready to execute on that plan, and if we fall off the rails, being able to get back to that plan as soon as possible. So that's kind of where our scope is today. But as we migrate our work on our overall platform, those capabilities are going to come closer and closer, and so that the integration between the planning side and this operations plan piece will, the difference between those will close up, and those capabilities will become closer together.
All right, well, we're coming up on the 10:30 mark of the webinar. I think we will pause here. I love the questions that everyone submitted throughout the webinar. Thank you again for your time and participating in our webinar today. We will be sending out a recording of this webinar afterwards, and so please have a look out for that, as well as a short survey. As a thank you for filling out the survey, we'll be sending out an ebook too to add to Jeff's excellent commentary today around the operational scheduling module and how it all works together. And in closing, I again would just like to say thank you for your time. And if you do have more questions or would like to get a hold of us, if you have an existing strategic account manager relationship, please reach out to them. Otherwise, you can send questions to info@aucerna.com.